In January of 2019, the small town of Pinefield, Wisconsin lay buried beneath a fresh, silent snow. Thick white layers rested evenly on the rooftops of single-story homes, and the streets, already quiet by nature, seemed utterly deserted after sundown. Streetlights glowed softly through the mist of frost, casting halos on the pavement where no footsteps disturbed the silence. Smoke rose from chimneys in slow ribbons, curling against the weight of the ski. Time moved differently here, slower, heavier. Even sorrow, when it came, seemed to arrive more gently, as if muffled by the snow. The Millers, Joan, Ray, and their 9-year-old son Zach, had only moved to Pinefield a year earlier. Their house sat on the edge of a wooded stretch that separated the town from the river. They kept to themselves, spending weekends fixing old pipes and repainting shutters instead of attending community barbecues or neighborhood meetings. Joan planted daffodils in the fall but never mentioned it to anyone. Ray worked remotely, and Zach mostly stayed indoors, his voice a quiet echo in a house that still felt too large for three. When Joan had found the dog in early autumn, no one in Pinefield paid much attention. The locals had seen enough strays to assume the worst: coyotes, cars, cold nights. But this one was different. She had wandered out from the trees like a ghost, ribs visible, one hind leg dragging awkwardly behind her, patches of fur missing from her side. Her chest bore deep, raw scratches, and the remnants of a rusted chain still clung to her neck. The vet said she was lucky to be alive, but not likely to recover. He didn't say it unkindly, just practically, the way people did when they'd seen too much to believe in happy endings. Joan didn't argue. She just paid the bill, wrapped the dog in a blanket, and brought her home. They named her Luna. It was Zach's idea. He said she looked like something out of a night sky. Quiet and distant, but always watching. The name stuck, and so did she. In the beginning, Luna hid beneath the staircase, wedged tight into the corner, as if the walls could protect her from whatever still echoed inside. She didn't bark. She didn't whine. She didn't eat much the first week, and only drank when the house was still. But slowly, day by day, she began to move. First from one room to another, always when no one was watching. Then closer, toward the warmth of the kitchen when Joan cooked, toward the garage when Ray hammered, toward the sliding glass doors when Zach pressed his nose to the glass to look at the snow. She didn't wag her tail. It stayed low, uncertain. Her body moved carefully, deliberately, like she'd been punished for moving too fast before. Her ears rarely perked, but her eyes watched everything. She studied the way Zach held a spoon, how Joan folded laundry, how Ray looked out the window when he thought no one noticed. There was no moment of transformation, no triumphant leap into someone's arms, no joyful bark, just a shift, gradual and barely noticeable. One morning, Luna followed Joan to the kitchen and lay beside the counter. That evening, she sat in the garage while Ray worked, her nose twitching at the scent of oil and pine. On a snowy Tuesday, she rested her chin on Zach's leg as he read a book on the rug, and he didn't move. He just let her stay. By winter, Luna had become a part of the house. Not decoration, not pet, presence. A quiet pulse in the room, a watcher at the window, a breath between rooms. She never demanded anything, never protested, but when the lights flickered during a storm, she stood at the door before anyone else. When Zach cried in his sleep, she was there before his mother. She remembered things, not like a person remembers, but deeper, like her bones knew something no one else did. She had seen places where voices only yelled and hands meant harm, yet she stayed, not because she forgot, but because she chose. Outside, the snow continued to fall, soft, slow, endless. Pinefield slept in its blanket of silence. And in the Miller home, beneath the hush of winter, a dog lay near the hearth, her ears twitching at the faintest creak of the floorboards, her breath steady, her eyes open. Always open. 3 months had passed since Luna first arrived at the Miller's home. Winter had deepened its grip on Pinefield, burying fences and mailboxes under layers of snow and painting every bare tree branch in glistening white. Inside the house, time felt suspended. The days moved gently, wrapped in quiet rituals and the subtle rhythms of recovery. Luna had changed, though not dramatically. Her fur had grown back, thick and soft, hiding most of the old scars. The gash on her chest had healed to a pale line beneath her coat, and the broken leg, now set and strengthened, left only a slight limp, more noticeable in the evenings when the cold stiffened her joints. She no longer hid in corners. Her body moved with more certainty, but never fully relaxed. Every step was cautious, deliberate, like she was constantly gauging the space around her. The house itself still carried a certain hush. Not sadness exactly, but a fragile stillness, as though everyone inside was careful not to wake something sleeping beneath the floorboards. The silence was not oppressive. It felt chosen, as if the Millers understood that some kinds of pain demanded quiet, and Luna's presence had taught them to honor that. She had grown accustomed to the space. She knew which floorboards creaked, which windows frosted first, and which steps to avoid when the house was asleep. She had learned to nudge open doors with her nose, moving softly from one room to another. Often she sat by the window in the living room, her eyes following the slow descent of snowflakes or the sway of pine branches in the wind. Her ears twitched at the distant whine of plows, but she never barked. When the freezing rain came in late January, she curled beside Zach's bed and did not leave his side. Her head rested on the edge of his blanket, her breathing synced with his. She watched his dreams with quiet patience, as if they were sacred and worth guarding. Joan often found them like that in the mornings, boy and dog, locked in some invisible understanding. There were moments when Luna showed signs of something deeper. One evening in the kitchen, Joan dropped a box of matches. As she knelt to gather them, Luna stiffened. Her body went rigid, nose lifted slightly, breath short. A low sound escaped her throat. Not a bark, not even a growl, but something like a warning. Joan paused, glanced at her, then brushed it off. Luna settled again, but her eyes didn't leave the stove. After that night, she began approaching the oven more often. She would sniff around its base, pause for several seconds, then walk away with a strange finality, as if confirming something only she could sense. It became a pattern, quiet inspections, silent retreats, no alarms, no scenes, just observation. Joan started to notice, but didn't know what to make of it. The stove worked fine. The house was old, the pipes made noise, and the wind sometimes rattled the windows in odd ways. Still, Luna's behavior was specific. She didn't seem afraid. She seemed attuned. It was on a particularly cold night that Joan awoke suddenly. The room was dark, and the silence unusually thick. Something had stirred her. Not a noise, but a feeling, like the house itself had held its breath. She sat up and saw Luna standing at the door of the bedroom. The dog was rigid, tail down, shoulders drawn in tight. Her body trembled, not from fear, but tension. Luna's gaze met hers. There was nothing wild in her expression, nothing panicked, only a deep, alert focus. As if she'd heard something Joan couldn't, smelled something rising beneath the surface of the walls. Luna didn't move until Joan stood up. And even then, she didn't bark or run. She simply turned and walked toward the hallway. Joan followed, barefoot and disoriented. Her heart pounded too fast for the silence around her. She passed Zach's room, saw him sleeping, and felt a flicker of reassurance. But Luna kept going, down the stairs, past the kitchen, toward the basement door. The house creaked softly with the wind, the old wooden frames bending ever so slightly under the pressure of snow on the roof. Joan tightened her robe and stepped onto the cold floor of the kitchen. The oven stood still, lifeless, but Luna's nose pressed against the floor just beneath it. Her body was low, head tilted. She inhaled once, then backed away. Joan stood motionless, listening. That's when she noticed it, the faintest scent in the air. Not strong, not alarming, but unnatural, a whisper of something metallic and sharp. She looked down at Luna. The dog hadn't taken her eyes off the stove. The moment hung, stretched between instinct and doubt. In the stillness of that night, with snow falling thick beyond the windows and frost climbing the glass, something passed between them. Not fear, not certainty. Just a message. Something was wrong, and Luna had been trying to say it all along. The kitchen was dim, lit only by the weak ambient glow that filtered through the frost-covered windows. The house was quiet, too quiet, the kind of silence that felt compressed, like it was holding something back. The stove stood cold and still, but the air carried a thickness that hadn't been there before. It clung to the lungs in a greasy way, oily and metallic, as if the room had taken a breath and was now unwilling to let it go. Luna moved with slow precision, her nose close to the floor, tracing an invisible path along the base of the wall. Her movements were sharp and deliberate, a hunter tracking something that didn't leave footprints. She paused near the back corner where the old gas pipe ran behind the cabinets, the same line that had been in place since long before the Millers moved in. She leaned forward, nostrils flaring, then took a step back, eyes fixed on the spot like it might come alive. Joan stood in the doorway, barefoot on the cold tile. She didn't need Luna to explain. She could smell it now, too. It wasn't strong, but it was there, distinct, artificial, and quietly alarming. It rose slowly, like something seeping through the seams of the house, barely perceptible but impossible to ignore once noticed. Her body tensed before her thoughts caught up. She turned and climbed the stairs, each step faster than the last. Ray was still asleep, curled on his side, unaware. She shook him gently at first, then with more urgency. He stirred reluctantly, eyes heavy, his voice thick with confusion, but the second his nose caught the scent in the air, his expression changed. Doubt left him like smoke. He sat up, alert, the sleep gone. Together, they moved quickly. Lights off, circuits shut down. The hum of appliances faded into a deeper quiet, the kind that came not with peace but with the expectation of something waiting to happen. Joan opened the cabinets, checked the seals on the stove, lifted the rug where the trapdoor to the crawl space hid. Ray fetched the flashlight, his hands steady, but his breathing shallow. The sound of movement woke Zach. He stepped into the hallway, hair tousled, feet bare, eyes adjusting to the dark. His small frame looked even smaller in the silence. Luna was already there. She padded over and pressed her nose into his hand, a quiet touch, almost ceremonial. He didn't flinch. Her presence made the moment feel real in a different way. Then the sound came. A snap, sharp and metallic from somewhere beneath the floor, not loud, but unmistakable, like a wire under pressure giving way, like something vital no longer holding. Luna growled low in her throat, a sound full of warning, her muscles tight, ears flattened. The house seemed to pause. Ray lifted the latch and opened the crawl space door. A wave of cold, stale air rose up, carrying with it the unmistakable stench of gas. Stronger now, sharper. The beam from his flashlight cut through dust and settled on the pipes, but it was clear enough without seeing. Something had shifted. Something was leaking. The smell coiled in the air like a slow-burning fuse. Joan reached for her phone and dialed the emergency number for the gas company. The line rang once, then went silent. She looked at the screen. No signal. She tried again. Still nothing. Outside, the wind was picking up, scratching at the windows, humming against the siding like a warning just out of reach. She didn't wait. Her fingers found the car keys on the counter. She turned to Ray, their eyes meeting in wordless agreement. Time had changed. There was no more room for hesitation. She opened the front door. The cold hit her first, crisp and immediate. Snow had begun to fall again, flakes catching in the air like fragments of glass. The wind rushed through the porch, carrying the weight of the storm with it. Trees groaned under ice. Power lines trembled in the distance. Luna dashed outside without being told. Her movements were purposeful, direct. She didn't glance back. She didn't wait. There was no panic in her body, only urgency, the kind born of instinct, the kind honed by memory. The rest of the family followed, pulling on coats, gathering what they could in seconds. The house behind them stood still, but something inside it had changed. The quiet had teeth now. The air was no longer safe. They stepped into the storm not because they were running away, but because something inside that dog had known the moment had come. Luna hadn't hesitated, and neither did they. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share your thoughts in the comments. Your support helps us bring more stories that matter. They stepped into the night, swallowed by the wind and snow. The cold clung to their skin like wet cloth, soaking through sleeves and stinging their faces before they could fully brace for it. The darkness was dense, softened only by the faint reflection of porch lights and the dim outline of the neighborhood beyond. Snowflakes moved sideways, flung by gusts that carved sharp edges into every breath. The trees groaned in the wind, their limbs rattling like bones beneath frost. Zack pressed his face into his mother's coat, his arms wrapped tightly around her waist. His small frame trembled, not from cold alone, but from something deeper, something unspoken. Joan pulled him closer, her hand shielding the back of his head, as if that gesture alone could block out what they had just left behind. Ray held the phone to his ear, trying again to reach dispatch, fingers stiff against the glass. Each attempt ended the same, with silence or static. Luna had moved ahead, her paws crunching through the fresh snow, leaving a wavering trail that led to the edge of the property. She stopped at the gate, her body motionless except for the subtle rise and fall of her breath. Her ears lay flat against her head, her tail tucked low, not from fear, but from focus. She stood still, as though tuned to some frequency the others could not hear. Her head turned slightly, her body tense with anticipation. Then it happened. Not an explosion, not the fiery burst they had feared, but a deep guttural sound that rose from beneath the earth. A low, concussive thump that seemed to push against the ribs from the inside. The ground trembled. A gray cloud burst from the basement vent, unfurling into the cold air like smoke escaping a sealed tomb. There was no fire. Something in the house had cut it off in time, but the pressure had released in one sudden wave. The windows on the north side shattered, glass scattering across the snow like stars fallen from a broken sky. Curtains flapped through the empty frames, drawn outward by the force of the release. The house groaned under the shift. For a second, the structure seemed to hold its breath, then it settled. No flames followed, just a heavy silence broken only by the wind. Snow swirled violently in the aftermath, caught in the eddy of displaced air. A vortex of frost spun through the yard before dissipating into the trees. The wind roared again, angling past rooftops and fences, carrying with it the scent of scorched dust and disturbed insulation. The Miller house stood still, its frame wounded but intact, the threat contained. One by one, porch lights flicked on up and down the street. Doors opened cautiously. Neighbors emerged, some wrapped in robes, others in work jackets, their faces lit with confusion and quiet dread. They gathered at the edge of their lawns, feet crunching on the ice, their breath rising in pale clouds. Some recognized Joan and Ray, others did not, but all eyes turned toward the house, toward what had almost been lost. Ray pulled Zack to him, holding him close. The boy's face remained hidden in his coat, his hands clinging to his father's sleeve. Joan stood at the edge of the porch steps, her fingers gripping the iron railing. She didn't feel the cold anymore. Her hands had gone numb. Her breath came in short bursts, shallow from adrenaline. She didn't look back at the house. She didn't have to. Luna walked to her slowly, moving through the snow with careful steps. She didn't rush. There was no panic in her body, just presence. She lowered herself beside Joan's feet, her fur pressed against the porch floor, her head slightly raised. She didn't whine. She didn't look up. She simply breathed, slow and deep, as if her rhythm alone could steady the world again. The silence grew around them. No sirens yet, no officials, just the quiet after a breaking point, just a family standing in the snow, touched by what could have happened but didn't. Neighbors began to murmur. Someone approached to ask if they were all right. Another offered a blanket. Still, Joan remained where she was, her hand on the railing, her gaze fixed somewhere far beyond the trees. Luna stayed at her feet, unmoving. She had done what she came to do. Not to run, not to bark, not to save herself, but to make sure they got out. To make sure they were whole. And now, she rested. The repairs took time, but the house was not lost. Contractors came and went over the following weeks, their boots tracking slush through the entry, their voices rising above the usual quiet. The damaged windows were replaced first, then the floors beneath the north wall, and finally, the gas line, ripped out entirely and installed anew. The crew from the gas company sent inspectors twice, then a third time, and finally left behind paperwork certifying the system as secure. But safety, for Joan, no longer resided in paper or signatures. The local paper had called, followed by a television station from the nearest city. They wanted to run the story. The family saved by their rescue dog. The narrow escape, the frozen night that could have ended in tragedy. But Joan had refused. She didn't want cameras, didn't want interviews. She didn't want Luna turned into a headline. What had happened to them wasn't a miracle. It was the result of a quiet, deliberate choice, one that had been made by a dog long before the danger ever arrived. Luna had chosen to stay, to listen, to protect. Life returned to the house, slowly and with caution. Zach became inseparable from Luna. He followed her through the yard, down snow-packed trails behind the house, and through the long hallway between bedrooms. He read to her in the afternoons, his voice calm and low, as if he believed she understood every word. Sometimes she lay her head on his lap. Other times, when his energy faded in the evenings, he rested his cheek against her shoulder and drifted off to sleep. She never moved. Joan ordered a new collar, deep navy leather with a silver buckle, and had it engraved before she even brought it home. One word, simple and quiet, sat beneath the tag's curve. Here. Not because Luna barked at threats, not because she reacted with noise or panic, but because she noticed what others didn't. She paid attention to what slipped past. She listened, in the truest sense of the word. Ray returned to his routines, though more slowly. He replaced a weathered section of fence in the backyard. He fixed the attic light that had been flickering since summer. He started bringing Luna with him when he worked in the garage, leaving the side door open so she could move freely between warmth and cold, solitude and company. Each night, when the lights dimmed in the kitchen and the house began to soften into evening, Luna made her way to the window beside the dining table. She sat, motionless, staring out at the yard beyond. The snow had melted now, the frost giving way to patches of brittle grass and dark earth. The trees were still bare, but the wind had changed. Less sharp, less angry. She didn't press her nose to the glass. She didn't search for movement. She simply watched. It wasn't anticipation. It wasn't fear. It was presence. A stillness so complete it seemed to draw the room inward. No one disturbed her during those moments. Zach sometimes sat on the floor behind her, mimicking her pose, his breath fogging the window pane beside hers. Joan would glance at them from the sink or the stove, her chest tightening with something she couldn't name, something both painful and full. The house no longer smelled of gas or smoke. It smelled like old wood, fresh linen, and the faint musk of winter fur. It sounded like silence broken only by pages turning, or the creak of floorboards settling, or the soft shift of paws against tile. Luna had not gone looking for this place, but she had found it, and now It was hers, too. The house had been repaired. The rooms had been swept clean. But the real healing had nothing to do with walls or wires. It had happened quietly, in the way Luna rested her head beside a sleeping child, in the way she stood still and listened when others passed by unaware. The house was safe because she watched it, not like a guard, like a witness. And the world, just outside that window, felt quieter for it. By April, the snow had retreated into the hills, and the first blades of grass pushed through the softening earth around the Miller home. Pinefield thawed slowly, cautiously, as if the town itself remembered the weight of winter too well to welcome warmth too quickly. Branches, once bare and bowed under frost, now held early buds. Rain came more often than sun, but even that felt like permission to begin again. The house, too, had softened. The hum of the furnace was no longer constant. Windows opened slightly during the day, letting in breezes that carried the scent of wet earth and old pine. Life had returned in slow motion, measured, quiet, but real. In the mornings, Joan sometimes found herself lingering by the back door, watching Luna and Zack from a distance. The boy would run barefoot in the still cool grass, and Luna would follow without hurry, never far behind, always at his rhythm. Inside the house, there were signs of transition. Winter coats moved deeper into closets. Firewood stacked beside the hearth began to gather dust. The heavy blankets on the couch were replaced with lighter throws. Joan began sorting through drawers she hadn't opened in months, setting aside papers, notes, items, long out of place. Spring brought with it the urge to organize not just rooms, but memory. One afternoon, while Zack and Ray were in town, Joan sat at the dining table with a pen and a folded sheet of paper. The house was quiet. Luna lay on the floor nearby, her body stretched in the last sunbeam slipping across the tile. Joan didn't speak. She didn't need to. She wrote slowly, pausing often, her eyes fixed on nothing in particular as the words formed. The letter wasn't long, just 2 sentences. It wasn't meant for anyone else. Not the town, not the paper, not even her family. It was for herself, a way to pin something intangible to the page. When she finished, she folded the paper and walked to the hallway closet. From the top shelf, she pulled down a small cardboard box, one she hadn't touched in over a year. Inside were a handful of things that no longer belonged to daily life but hadn't yet been let go. Drawings from Zack's early school days. A birthday card he had once made with more stickers than words. A broken plastic flashlight he used to carry when he was afraid of the dark. And near the bottom, wrapped in soft tissue, the worn metal tag from Luna's intake collar at the clinic. The one they had replaced after her recovery. Joan added the folded letter to the box and closed the lid. She didn't cry. She didn't linger. She returned it to the shelf, tucked just behind an old quilt and a spare radio. Later that night, as shadows stretched long across the hardwood floors and the corners of the house softened into evening stillness, Luna approached the window like she always did. She didn't press her nose to the glass. She didn't search for movement. She simply sat, watching the last of the light fade behind the trees. Zack sat nearby on the floor, legs crossed, a book open in his lap, though he had stopped reading. He glanced at her from time to time, as if to confirm she was still there. Joan stood in the doorway, watching both of them, her hands resting lightly on the frame. Something in her chest ached, not from sorrow, but from depth. The kind of ache that comes when you realize how quietly someone has become part of your life, how thoroughly their silence fills the spaces between everything else. She remembered the letter, the words still clear in her mind, not because she had labored over them, but because they had arrived fully formed. She was not escaping, she was protecting. She chose us when we had forgotten how to choose ourselves. There had been no need for more, because sometimes the truest silence was not the absence of sound, but the moment your heart found its echo in something that had never spoken at all.